Humiliation is an art form at elite universities. Seoul National University, where Korea's future leaders, CEOs, and politicians are cultivated, had perfected that art over decades. Students competed ruthlessly for academic supremacy, social status, and the networking connections that would determine their entire careers. The competition was brutal, sophisticated, and absolutely merciless toward anyone perceived as weak or inferior. Seo-jun Dong had mastered the art of humiliation by age 22. As the heir to Dong Industries, a conglomerate worth $40 billion controlling everything from semiconductors to shipping, he'd grown up understanding that power meant the ability to elevate allies and destroy enemies with equal efficiency. At Seoul National University's graduate business program, he was royalty. Top of his class academically, president of the most exclusive student organization, connected to every powerful family in Korea through his father's business empire. People didn't challenge Seo-jun. They deferred to him, sought his favor, tried desperately to be included in his inner circle because association with the Dong family heir could make or break entire careers. Which made Olivia Martinez's indifference to his status absolutely intolerable. She was a transfer student who joined the MBA program 6 weeks ago, African American, from some university in the United States that Seo-jun had never heard of, here on some kind of international exchange scholarship that suggested she was academically competent but financially unremarkable. She was pretty enough to be noticed, smart enough to contribute meaningfully in class discussions, and completely, infuriatingly indifferent to Seo-jun's status and power. She didn't defer to him. Didn't seek his approval. Didn't seem to care at all about the social hierarchy that governed everyone else's behavior. When Seo-jun made cutting remarks about American business practices during class, she countered with data-driven arguments that made him look uninformed. When he organized exclusive networking events for the top students, she declined invitations politely, saying she had other commitments. When his friends tried to establish dominance through subtle social pressures, she ignored them completely and focused on her academic work. It was infuriating. And Seo-jun had decided it was time to teach her the lesson that everyone at Seoul National University learned eventually: challenging the Dong family heir had consequences. The opportunity came during a morning class break in the hallway outside their corporate strategy lecture. Olivia was walking toward the library, carrying a stack of textbooks and her laptop, focused on something on her phone and not paying attention to her surroundings. Seo-jun was with his usual group, 5 other students from wealthy families, all of them eager to participate in whatever social dominance game Seo-jun was playing. "Watch this," Seo-jun said to his friends as Olivia approached. He timed it perfectly, stepping directly into her path at the exact moment when she looked up from her phone, forcing her to stop abruptly. The sudden stop made her lose balance slightly, and her textbooks tumbled from her arms, scattering across the hallway floor along with papers that had been tucked between the books. It was a deliberately engineered accident, the kind of petty dominance move that established social hierarchy through public embarrassment. "Oh, how clumsy," Seo-jun said in English, loudly enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. His English was perfect, educated at Phillips Exeter Academy before attending Harvard for undergraduate before transferring back to Seoul National for his MBA. Perhaps American students should pay more attention to where they're walking. This isn't some casual American university where you can just wander around carelessly. His friends laughed. Other students in the hallway stopped to watch, clearly recognizing this as a social dominance display that would have consequences for how they treated Olivia going forward. If she responded with anger, she'd look unstable and emotional. If she cried, she'd look weak. If she ignored it and walked away, she'd be conceding his social superiority. Seo-jun had engineered a situation where every response option led to her losing status. Olivia looked at him calmly, then knelt to gather her scattered books and papers. "Thank you for the feedback about American casualness," she said, her voice neutral and controlled. "I'll try to be more aware of people who deliberately create obstacles in hallways." It was a perfect response, acknowledging what had happened without showing either anger or submission, turning his engineered accident into his problem rather than hers. But Seo-jun wasn't finished. "Perhaps if you were more focused on understanding your place in this program rather than on pretending you belong in discussions dominated by students from families who actually understand international business, you wouldn't have these coordination problems." It was a cutting insult wrapped in concern, suggesting that Olivia was inferior both socially and intellectually, that her participation in the MBA program was charity rather than merit. Several students gasped. That level of direct insult was unusual even for Seo-jun's sophisticated cruelty. Olivia stood with her gathered books, looking at him with an expression that suggested she was evaluating whether he was worth the energy of a response. My place in this program was earned through academic merit and professional achievement, not through family wealth and connections, she said clearly. I'm sorry if my presence based on actual qualification rather than inherited privilege makes you uncomfortable. She turned to walk away. That's when Seo-jun made his catastrophic mistake. Your father probably works in some mid-level management position and thinks sending you to Seoul National will elevate your family's status. It won't. People like you don't belong in spaces designed for Korea's future leaders. You're here because diversity programs make universities look progressive, not because you actually deserve the spot. The hallway went absolutely silent. That level of direct racist insult crossed lines that even Seo-jun's social protection usually didn't permit. Olivia turned back, and Seo-jun saw something in her expression that should have warned him he'd made a serious error. You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, she said quietly. And you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about making assumptions. Before Seo-jun could respond, someone appeared at the end of the hallway. A tall black man in an immaculately tailored suit, walking with the kind of presence that made everyone instinctively move aside. He was imposing, maybe 6'4", with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, wearing a suit that was clearly custom-made and expensive enough to cost more than most students' annual tuition. He walked directly toward Olivia, his expression showing concern. Olivia, he said in English with an American accent. Are you all right? I came to meet you for lunch and someone said there was an incident in this hallway. I'm fine, Dad, Olivia said, her voice completely different now, warm, familiar. Just some ignorant classmate making assumptions about who I am and why I'm here. Dad. Seo-jun felt his stomach drop. And then he saw who was following Olivia's father down the hallway. His own father. Dong Hyun-woo, CEO of Dong Industries, one of the most powerful businessmen in Korea. Walking several steps behind the black man. Looking respectful in ways Seo-jun had never seen his father look toward anyone. When they reached Olivia and her father, Dong Hyun-woo bowed. A full 90-degree bow, the kind of deep formal bow that indicated profound respect or apology to someone of significantly higher status. Ambassador Martinez, Seo-jun's father said in careful English. It is an honor to see you. I apologize if my son was involved in any disrespectful behavior towards your daughter. If he has caused offense, I will ensure appropriate consequences and formal apology. Ambassador. The word echoed in Seo-jun's head while his entire understanding of reality restructured itself. Olivia's father looked at Dong Hyun-woo, then at Seo-jun, then back at Olivia. What happened? Ambassador Martinez asked his daughter. This student, Olivia gestured to Seo-jun, deliberately caused me to drop my books, then made comments about Americans being casual and not belonging in this program. He then suggested that I was only here because of diversity programs rather than merit, and that my father probably works in mid-level management and thinks sending me to Seoul National will elevate our family's status. The hallway was completely silent. Everyone was watching this confrontation with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a social execution. Ambassador Martinez looked at Seo-jun with an expression of profound disappointment. I see. So you assumed that because my daughter is black and American, she must be from a working-class background and only here because of affirmative action policies. I didn't mean, Seo-jun stammered, his carefully cultivated social dominance completely shattered. You absolutely meant it. You engineered a situation designed to humiliate her publicly, then made explicitly racist comments about her merit and her family's status. Ambassador Martinez's voice was calm but absolutely cold. You made those comments without knowing anything about her background, her qualifications, or who I am. He turned to Dong Hyun-woo. Your son just told my daughter, in front of witnesses, that people like her don't belong in spaces designed for Korea's future leaders. He suggested she's only here because of diversity programs, not merit. He implied her father was mid-level management seeking social elevation through her education. Dong Hyunwoo's face had gone pale. He turned to Seo-jun with an expression of absolute fury. Is this true? Did you say these things to Ambassador Martinez's daughter? Father, I didn't know. Did you say these things? Yes, but I thought. You thought nothing. You made racist assumptions and humiliated the daughter of one of the most important diplomatic figures in East Asian international relations. Dong Hyunwoo's voice was shaking with rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? Ambassador Martinez has personal relationships with the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Japan, the President of South Korea. He controls diplomatic relationships that affect billions of dollars in international trade. He could make one phone call and destroy our family's business relationships across 3 continents. He turned back to Ambassador Martinez, bowing even deeper this time. I am profoundly sorry for my son's behavior. His actions are inexcusable and reflect failures in his upbringing that I take full responsibility for. Please allow me to make appropriate amends for this disrespect. Ambassador Martinez looked at his daughter. Olivia, what would you like to happen here? Olivia looked at Seo-jun, who was standing there with his carefully constructed social dominance completely destroyed, his friends having backed away from him like he was radioactive, his father looking at him with fury and disappointment. I'd like him to actually learn something, she said. Not just be punished by his father and go back to the same arrogant behavior once this blows over. I want him to understand why what he did was wrong and to actually change. That's very generous, her father said. More generous than he deserves. Maybe. But punishing ignorance without teaching just creates resentment. If he's going to be Korea's future business leader like he keeps claiming, he needs to learn that power doesn't mean you can humiliate people who you perceive as inferior. Ambassador Martinez turned to Dong Hyunwoo. Your son will issue a public apology to my daughter in front of the same students who witnessed his insults. He will also write a formal essay about unconscious bias and assumptions about merit that will be submitted to the university's Diversity and Inclusion Office. And he will meet with me personally to discuss international relations and the dangers of racist assumptions in global business. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Of course, Dong Hyunwoo said immediately. All of that will be completed within the week. And Seo-jun will face additional consequences within our family that I will determine privately. Ambassador Martinez nodded, then looked at Seo-jun directly. You made assumptions about my daughter based on her race and nationality. You assumed she was unqualified, that I was unimportant, that your wealth and family status made you superior to her. All of those assumptions were catastrophically wrong. He paused. I'm the United States ambassador to South Korea. I was previously the Deputy Secretary of State, before that the ambassador to the United Nations. I have personal relationships with every major political leader in the developed world. My daughter is here on full academic merit. She graduated top of her class from Stanford, worked for McKinsey Consulting for 3 years where she was the youngest person ever promoted to senior associate, and is completing her MBA here because she's interested in Asian business practices and international development. He let that information sink in. Your assumptions about her qualifications and my status were based purely on racism. The belief that Black Americans must be from working-class backgrounds and could only achieve success through affirmative action rather than merit. That racism nearly destroyed your father's business relationships and your own future career before it's even begun. Learn from this. Ambassador Martinez took Olivia's books from her, handed them to Seo-jun. Carry these to wherever she was going. Consider it the beginning of your education in basic respect. Then he and Olivia walked away, leaving Seo-jun standing in the hallway holding her books while his father stared at him with an expression that promised severe consequences later. Everyone in the hallway was watching. Everyone had witnessed the complete destruction of Seo-jun Dong's social dominance, had seen him revealed as an ignorant racist who'd nearly destroyed his own family's business relationships through arrogant assumptions. The heir to Dong Industries, reduced to carrying books for the student he'd tried to humiliate. It was the most public, complete social demolition anyone at Seoul National University had ever witnessed. And it had happened because Seo-jun had made the fundamental error of assuming that wealth and family status made him superior to someone whose father had the power to destroy everything his family had built with a single phone call. Subscribe to see what happens when an arrogant heir learns that assumptions about race and merit can cost you everything, and that real power doesn't need to announce itself. Comment where you're watching from, and tell me, have you ever seen someone get destroyed by their own assumptions? This story is just beginning. The conversation with his father that evening was the worst of Seo-jun's life. They were in Dong Hyun-woo's private office at the family's Gangnam headquarters. A space designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul, artwork worth millions, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Seo-jun had been summoned immediately after the hallway incident. No time to prepare, no opportunity to craft explanations or excuses. His father was standing by the windows, back turned, radiating fury in his posture. "Do you understand what you almost did today?" Dong Hyun-woo said without turning around, his voice dangerously quiet. "Father, I apologize. I didn't ask for an apology. I asked if you understand what you almost did. I offended Ambassador Martinez's daughter. I made inappropriate comments based on assumptions. You nearly destroyed 30 years of carefully cultivated business relationships across 3 continents because you couldn't control your arrogant need to humiliate a classmate who didn't show you sufficient deference." Dong Hyun-woo turned, and Seo-jun saw his father's expression was absolutely cold. Ambassador Ricardo Martinez is one of the most powerful diplomatic figures in the world. He has personal relationships with the leaders of every major economy. He controls access to American markets, influences trade policies, facilitates or blocks international business deals worth billions. He walked toward Seo-jun slowly. "Our family's business depends on maintaining positive relationships with American partners. We have manufacturing contracts with U.S. tech companies worth $8 billion annually. We have shipping partnerships that move goods through American ports. We have investments in American real estate and technology startups. All of that, all of IT, could be destroyed if Ambassador Martinez makes one phone call suggesting that Dong Industries is led by racists who can't be trusted in international business. I didn't know who he was. That's exactly the problem. You didn't know who he was, so you assumed he was unimportant because he's black. You saw his daughter, made racist assumptions about her qualifications and background, and humiliated her publicly because you thought your family's wealth made you untouchable." Dong Hyun-woo leaned forward. "Let me be absolutely clear about how badly you miscalculated. Ambassador Martinez has more actual power than our entire family. He doesn't need wealth, he commands diplomatic relationships that determine whether wealth can be used effectively in international markets. Making him an enemy would be catastrophic." "I understand. I'll apologize, I'll write the essay, I'll meet with him." "You'll do all of that, yes. But you'll also face consequences within our family that ensure you never make this kind of mistake again." His father's voice was ice cold. "Effective immediately, you're removed from your position as my heir apparent. Your younger brother Ji-woo will take over that role." Seo-jun felt the words like a physical blow. "Father, please. You've proven you're not ready for leadership. Real leaders understand that power isn't about humiliating people perceived as inferior. It's about building relationships, understanding complex social dynamics, and never making assumptions based on surface characteristics like race or nationality." Dong Hyun-woo sat behind his massive desk. "You're 22 years old and you just demonstrated the judgment of a bigoted teenager. That doesn't qualify you to lead a $40 billion conglomerate with operations in 37 countries. This is one mistake. This is a pattern. I've received reports from your professors that you routinely belittle classmates you perceive as inferior. I've heard about your exclusive networking events that are really just social dominance games where you determine who's worthy of your attention. I've watched you develop into an arrogant, entitled young man who thinks family wealth makes him superior to everyone around him." His father's voice was harsh. "Today's incident was just the most visible example of a fundamental character flaw I've been ignoring because you perform well academically and socially within Korean business circles. But academic performance means nothing if you can't function effectively in international business where you'll encounter people from different backgrounds who won't tolerate racist condescension. What do I have to do to restore your confidence? You have to actually change. Not just perform changed behavior to restore your position, but fundamentally alter how you think about power, merit, and respect. Dong Hyunwoo pulled out a folder. Ambassador Martinez has agreed to personal mentorship. You'll meet with him weekly for the next 6 months to discuss international relations, unconscious bias, and effective leadership in diverse business environments. You'll actually listen and learn instead of just waiting for it to be over so you can go back to your old behavior. I'll do that. You'll also work for our company's American subsidiary for the next year. Not in a leadership role, you'll be a junior analyst reporting to American managers who won't care about your family connections. You'll learn what it means to succeed on merit rather than on inherited status. Father, a year in a junior position will destroy my social standing. Good. Your current social standing is based on fear and family wealth rather than on genuine respect for your abilities. Destroy it. Build something better based on actual competence. Dong Hyunwoo closed the folder. Your brother Ji-woo has been working quietly in our operations division for 3 years, learning the business from the ground up without seeking attention or status. He's proven himself through actual work rather than through social dominance games. He's ready for leadership in ways you aren't. Please give me a chance to prove I can change. I am giving you that chance. The mentorship with Ambassador Martinez, the year working in America, the requirement that you succeed based on merit, that's all designed to give you opportunity to develop into someone worthy of leadership. But you have to actually take advantage of it instead of just performing compliance while resenting the loss of status. Seo-jun sat in his father's office feeling his entire world collapsing. Everything he'd built, his social dominance at university, his position as heir to Dong Industries, his carefully cultivated image as Korea's future business elite, all of it destroyed because he'd made racist assumptions about a classmate. The public apology happens tomorrow, his father said. You'll do it during the lunch break when maximum students are present. You'll be genuine, specific about what you did wrong, and clear about your commitment to change. Ambassador Martinez will be present to witness it, as will university administration. I understand. And Seo-jun, if you ever make racist comments again, if you ever humiliate someone based on assumptions about their background or qualifications, you're not just removed from succession. You're completely cut off from family resources. You'll make your own way in the world without the Dong family name or wealth. Clear? Yes, father. Go home. Prepare your apology. Actually think about what you did wrong instead of just focusing on the consequences you're facing. Seo-jun left his father's office feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. The public apology the next day was excruciating. The university had arranged for it to happen in the main courtyard during lunch break, ensuring maximum attendance. Ambassador Martinez was present, standing with Olivia and several university administrators. Seo-jun's father was also there, making it clear this had full family backing. Seo-jun stood in front of approximately 300 students and faculty, many of them holding phones to record the moment. I'm here to apologize publicly for my behavior toward Olivia Martinez yesterday, he began, his voice shaking slightly despite efforts to maintain composure. I deliberately caused her to drop her books, then made comments suggesting she didn't belong in this program based on racist assumptions about her qualifications and her family's background. He took a breath, forcing himself to continue. I assumed that because Olivia is Black and American, she must be from a working-class family and only here because of diversity programs rather than merit. I assumed her father was unimportant. I assumed my family's wealth made me superior to her. All of those assumptions were based on racism, the belief that Black Americans couldn't possibly achieve success through merit and talent. The crowd was absolutely silent, everyone watching him humiliate himself publicly. Those assumptions were completely wrong. Olivia is far more qualified than I am, she graduated top of her class from Stanford, worked at McKinsey Consulting, and is here on full academic merit. Her father is the United States ambassador to South Korea, one of the most powerful diplomatic figures in the world. My racist assumptions almost destroyed my family's business relationships and taught me that real power doesn't need to announce itself. I only knew about my own family's wealth because I used it for social dominance. Real power operates quietly. He looked directly at Olivia. I'm sorry for my behavior. I'm sorry for the racist assumptions. I'm sorry for trying to humiliate you because I was threatened by your indifference to my social status. You deserve better than how I treated you, and I'm committed to actually changing so I never make these kinds of mistakes again. It was genuine. Not because Seo-jun had suddenly developed moral character overnight, but because he'd spent the entire night thinking about how badly he'd miscalculated and how much his arrogance had cost him. Olivia stepped forward. I accept your apology. I hope you actually learn from this experience instead of just performing remorse until the consequences fade. I will learn. I promise. Ambassador Martinez spoke next. Racism in international business isn't just morally wrong, it's strategically stupid. The world is diverse. Success requires working effectively with people from every background, culture, and nationality. Leaders who make assumptions based on race or ethnicity fail because they miss opportunities, alienate potential partners, and create unnecessary conflicts. Seo-jun has learned this lesson publicly and painfully. I hope others watching learn it more easily. The apology concluded. Students dispersed, many of them talking about what they'd witnessed. Seo-jun's social dominance was completely destroyed. He'd gone from untouchable heir to cautionary tale about racist assumptions in approximately 24 hours. But more than the social consequences, Seo-jun was processing something deeper. He'd genuinely been wrong in ways he'd never confronted before. Growing up wealthy in Korea, he'd absorbed unconscious beliefs about racial hierarchy without examining them. He'd internalized the idea that wealth and family status made him superior to people from different backgrounds. He'd never questioned those beliefs because they'd never cost him anything. Until they'd nearly cost him everything. The first mentorship meeting with Ambassador Martinez happened 3 days after the public apology, at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. Seo-jun arrived exactly on time, dressed professionally but not ostentatiously, uncertain what to expect from this mandated education. Ambassador Martinez's office was impressive but not showy. Diplomatic rather than designed to intimidate, with photographs showing him with various world leaders, artwork from different cultures, furniture that suggested global sophistication. Sit down, Ambassador Martinez said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Let's establish what we're doing here. Your father arranged this mentorship as consequence for your racist behavior. You're here because you have to be, not because you want to be. Clear? Yes, sir. I agreed to it because I think teaching is more valuable than punishment, and because your father is genuinely trying to correct serious flaws in your upbringing. But I won't waste my time if you're just performing compliance without actually engaging. So decide now. Are you going to actually listen and learn, or are you going to sit through these sessions counting down until your required 6 months are over? Seo-jun thought about that carefully. I want to learn. Not just because I have to restore my position in the family business, but because I genuinely didn't understand how wrong I was until I faced consequences. I've been arrogant and racist without examining those attitudes. I want to change that. Good answer. Possibly honest, possibly just sophisticated performance. We'll find out over the next 6 months. Ambassador Martinez pulled out a folder. Let's start with your essay about unconscious bias. Read it to me. Seo-jun had spent 2 full days writing the essay, actually trying to understand the concept rather than just producing something that sounded good. He pulled out his copy and read. Unconscious bias refers to attitudes and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. I demonstrated this when I saw Olivia Martinez and immediately assumed she was less qualified than Korean students because she's Black and American. I didn't consciously think Black people are inferior, I unconsciously believed that academic success and family status were less likely for someone of her race and nationality. That unconscious bias caused me to misread everything about her situation. I assumed she was here on a diversity scholarship because I unconsciously believed Black Americans needed special programs to succeed. I assumed her father was unimportant because I unconsciously believed black families didn't produce people with significant power. I assumed my behavior was acceptable because I unconsciously believed people from lesser backgrounds should accept their inferior social position. All of those unconscious beliefs were based on racist programming I'd absorbed growing up in an environment where wealth and Korean ethnicity were treated as superior to other backgrounds. I never examined those beliefs because they never cost me anything, until they almost cost me everything. Learning about unconscious bias means recognizing that I carry these racist attitudes even when I don't consciously endorse racism. It means actively examining my assumptions about people before I act on them. It means understanding that merit isn't determined by race, nationality, or family wealth, it's determined by actual achievement and capability. I failed to do any of that with Olivia. I saw her race and nationality, made assumptions based on unconscious bias, and acted on those assumptions in ways that were racist and harmful. I'm committed to examining and changing those unconscious biases so I don't make similar mistakes in the future. He finished reading and looked up. Ambassador Martinez was quiet for a moment. That's better than I expected. More thoughtful than the usual essays students produce when forced to write about bias. Did you actually write it or did you hire someone? I wrote it. Took me 2 days because I kept researching to understand the concepts better. I wanted to actually get it right instead of just producing something acceptable. Why? Because I've been thinking about how badly I miscalculated with Olivia, and I realized my assumptions were based on beliefs I'd never examined. I don't want to keep making those kinds of mistakes. You don't want to keep making mistakes that cost you status and position. That's different from actually caring about racism. Seo-jun considered that. You're right. My motivation is primarily self-interest. I don't want to face consequences like I faced this week. But does the motivation matter if the result is genuinely examining and changing racist attitudes? Interesting question. Most people would claim noble motivations for change. You're admitting you're driven by self-interest. Ambassador Martinez leaned back. I appreciate the honesty. And you're right, motivation matters less than actual change. If self-interest makes you examine unconscious bias and genuinely change behavior, that's still valuable even if it's not morally pure. So what do I actually need to learn here? You need to understand that the world is far more complex than the Korean business hierarchy you've been raised in. You need to learn that different cultures value different things, that power manifests in different ways across different contexts, that assumptions based on your limited experience are dangerous in international business. Ambassador Martinez pulled up a map on his computer screen showing his diplomatic career. I've worked in 15 countries. I've negotiated with dictators and democratically elected leaders, with theocratic governments and secular democracies, with capitalist economies and state-controlled markets. Success required understanding that American values and approaches don't work everywhere, that what seems obvious to me might be completely wrong in different cultural contexts. He looked at Seo-jun directly. You assumed Korean business hierarchy was universal. That wealth and family status would make you superior everywhere. You didn't understand that in American culture, inherited wealth is less respected than earned achievement. You didn't recognize that in diplomatic contexts, political power outweighs economic power. You didn't know that in my daughter's background, academic merit from Stanford and professional achievement at McKinsey mean more than family connections. I understand that now. Do you? Or do you just understand that you miscalculated this one time? Ambassador Martinez pulled out another document. Let me tell you what I know about you from research. You attended Phillips Exeter Academy and Harvard for undergraduate. Both elite institutions where wealth opens doors. You returned to Seoul National University for your MBA instead of continuing in American business education. Why? Because I wanted to build connections in Korean business networks that would be valuable when I inherit leadership of Dong Industries. Exactly. You came back to an environment where your family wealth and Korean ethnicity gave you maximum advantage. You chose comfort and easy dominance over the challenge of proving yourself in environments where you'd have to succeed on merit. Ambassador Martinez paused. That's not wrong strategically. But it means your entire adult life has been spent in spaces where you're automatically privileged. You've never had to function as a minority, never had to prove yourself to people who doubt your capabilities, never had to overcome systematic disadvantages. And Olivia has. Olivia has faced assumptions about her capabilities her entire life. Being Black in elite educational spaces means constantly proving you belong, constantly exceeding expectations to be considered equal, constantly dealing with people who assume you're only there because of diversity programs. She graduated top of her class at Stanford, not just good, the best, and people still questioned whether she deserved it. She was the youngest person ever promoted to senior associate at McKinsey, and colleagues still suggested it was because the company needed diversity success stories. Ambassador Martinez leaned forward. She came to Seoul National University knowing she'd face students like you who would make racist assumptions. She did it anyway because she's interested in international business and because she refuses to let racism determine where she can study. That's courage you've never had to develop because you've always been in environments designed to privilege you. Seo-jun absorbed that. How do I develop that courage? That ability to function in spaces where I'm not automatically privileged? You start by spending a year in America working for our company's subsidiary, which your father has already arranged. You'll be a junior analyst reporting to American managers who don't care about your family wealth. You'll be evaluated on actual performance, not on potential or family connections. You'll learn what it means to succeed when nobody's giving you advantages. I understand the plan. But what should I be learning during these mentorship sessions? You should be learning how to see the world from perspectives other than privileged Korean Heir. How to recognize when your assumptions are based on limited experience. How to function effectively with people from different backgrounds without making them prove they deserve basic respect. Over the next 6 months, Seo-jun met with Ambassador Martinez weekly. The sessions were challenging in ways he'd never experienced, not academically difficult, but forcing him to confront assumptions and attitudes he'd held unconsciously his entire life. Ambassador Martinez assigned readings about racism, colonialism, international power dynamics, cultural differences in business practices. They discussed case studies where business leaders had failed because of cultural insensitivity or racist assumptions. They talked about diplomatic incidents that had destroyed relationships worth billions because someone hadn't understood how their behavior would be perceived in different cultural contexts. Here's a case study, Ambassador Martinez said during one session. American pharmaceutical company tries to expand into African markets. They send executives who make presentations about bringing civilization and health to primitive populations. The contracts fail catastrophically because the executives' racism was so obvious that African government officials refused to work with them. Company lost $3 billion in potential revenue. What's the lesson? That racist attitudes cost money even when they're not intended as insults. Deeper than that. What's the actual lesson? Seo-jun thought carefully. That the executives assumed African officials wouldn't notice or wouldn't care about racist framing because they internalized beliefs about African inferiority. They thought they could use condescending language and still succeed because they underestimated their counterparts' sophistication. Better. Now apply that to what you did with Olivia. I assumed she wouldn't be able to respond effectively to my humiliation attempt because I underestimated her based on racist assumptions about Black Americans. I thought I could insult her without consequences because I didn't understand who she or her father were. And why didn't you understand who they were? Because I didn't bother to learn. I saw her race and nationality, made assumptions, and acted on those assumptions without gathering any actual information about her background. Exactly. That's the fundamental error, assuming you don't need to learn about people who don't fit your unconscious stereotypes about who matters. Ambassador Martinez pulled up another case study. This pattern repeats constantly in international business. Powerful people make assumptions based on race, nationality, gender, or other surface characteristics. Those assumptions lead them to miss important information, underestimate key people, and make strategic errors that cost them opportunities or relationships. The education was working. Seo-jun found himself thinking differently about people, questioning his initial assumptions, recognizing when he was making judgments based on unconscious bias rather than actual information. But the real test would be whether that learning translated to actual behavior change once he wasn't under direct supervision. The year in America was harder than Seo-jun had anticipated. He arrived in New York as a junior analyst at Dong Industries' American subsidiary, a position so entry-level that nobody cared about his family connections or his education. He was just another MBA graduate trying to prove himself in a competitive business environment. His manager was a black woman named Michelle Roberts, 15 years older than him, who'd worked her way up through the company from an administrative assistant position to senior operations director. She was brilliant, demanding, and completely unimpressed by Seo-jun's background. "I don't care that your father owns the parent company," she told him during their first meeting. "In my division, you succeed or fail based on the quality of your work. Family connections mean nothing here. Clear? Clear. Good. Your first assignment is analyzing operational efficiency in our East Coast distribution network. I need comprehensive assessment of bottlenecks, cost inefficiencies, and improvement recommendations. You have 3 weeks. Questions? No, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I'm Michelle or Ms. Roberts when we're in formal contexts. Ma'am sounds condescending from someone your age. Understood, Ms. Roberts." The work was genuinely difficult. Seo-jun had to actually analyze operations in detail, understand logistics that he'd never bothered learning because he'd assumed leadership meant delegating to people who understood operational details. He worked 12-hour days gathering data, conducting interviews with distribution managers, building models to identify inefficiency patterns. His first draft of recommendations was torn apart by Michelle during review. "This analysis is superficial. You've identified obvious inefficiencies that anyone could see from basic data review. Where's the deeper analysis of why those inefficiencies exist? What systemic issues are creating the patterns? What cultural or organizational barriers would prevent implementing your recommendations? I didn't consider those factors." Then you didn't do complete analysis. Go back. Actually talk to the people running these operations. Understand their constraints, their challenges, their perspectives on why things work the way they do. Then come back with recommendations that account for real-world implementation challenges. Seo-jun redid the entire analysis. Spent 2 weeks actually talking to distribution center managers, warehouse workers, logistics coordinators. Learned that many of the inefficiencies he'd identified were actually adaptations to constraints he hadn't understood. Aging infrastructure, union contracts that limited scheduling flexibility, geographic challenges that made certain routing decisions necessary despite appearing inefficient on paper. His revised analysis was substantially better. Michelle approved it with minor modifications. Better. You actually listened to people instead of just imposing solutions based on theory. That's important for effective leadership. Over the following months, Seo-jun worked on increasingly complex projects. Michelle pushed him hard, never accepting mediocre work, forcing him to actually develop analytical and operational skills rather than relying on natural intelligence or family connections. He also experienced being a minority for the first time in his life. In meetings, he noticed that when he spoke, people sometimes dismissed his suggestions until a white colleague repeated the same idea. He experienced having his English language abilities questioned despite being fluent. He dealt with colleagues making assumptions about his technical capabilities based on stereotypes about Asians being good at numbers but bad at creative thinking. It was subtle, nothing as overt as what he'd done to Olivia. But it was constant, wearing, exhausting in ways he'd never experienced before. "How do you deal with it?" he asked Michelle one day after a meeting where his analysis had been questioned in ways that white colleagues' work wasn't questioned. Deal with what? The constant assumptions. The subtle dismissals. Having to prove yourself over and over when other people are just assumed to be competent. Michelle looked at him carefully. "Welcome to being a minority in professional spaces. What you experienced in that meeting is a tiny fraction of what I deal with constantly. And what your classmate Olivia has dealt with her entire academic and professional career. It's exhausting. It is. But you develop resilience. You learn to document everything so your achievements can't be dismissed. You build networks with other people who face similar challenges. You prove yourself so thoroughly that dismissing you becomes obviously biased rather than defensible skepticism. Does it ever stop being exhausting? No. But you get better at managing it. And if you're lucky, you develop empathy for other people who face similar challenges, so you don't recreate the same patterns when you're in positions of power. Seo-jun thought about that conversation for weeks afterward. He'd experienced a tiny fraction of what Olivia dealt with constantly, and it had been incredibly draining. The idea that she navigated that exhaustion while maintaining academic excellence and professional achievement was humbling. 6 months into his American assignment, Seo-jun encountered Olivia again. She was in New York for a McKinsey project, and they ran into each other at a business conference in Manhattan. Seo-jun saw her across the conference hall and felt his stomach drop. He hadn't spoken to her since the public apology at Seoul National University. She saw him, considered for a moment, then walked over. Seo-jun. How's the American exile going? It's educational. Michelle Roberts is an excellent manager who doesn't tolerate mediocre work. Michelle's great. She was my supervisor when I worked at Dong Industries subsidiary during my McKinsey rotation 2 years ago. She'll teach you more about actual business operations than you learned in your entire MBA program. She's definitely doing that. How did you know I was working for her? My father mentioned it. He and your father communicate regularly about your progress in the mentorship and the American assignment. Seo-jun absorbed that. They're monitoring me together. They're ensuring you're actually learning instead of just performing compliance. My father takes the mentorship seriously. I've noticed. The weekly sessions are challenging in ways I didn't expect. Good. You needed to be challenged. Your whole life has been too easy. Olivia paused. Can I ask you something? Are you actually changing, or are you just getting better at performing changed behavior? I think I'm actually changing. I've experienced being a minority in professional spaces for the first time. It's given me perspective I didn't have before about what you've dealt with constantly. What have you experienced? Having my suggestions dismissed until white colleagues repeat them. Being questioned about English fluency despite being perfectly fluent. Dealing with stereotypes about Asian technical capabilities. Nothing as overt as what I did to you, but constant low-level bias that's exhausting. And how does that make you feel about what you did to me? Ashamed. I put you through something far worse than what I'm experiencing, in a foreign country where you had fewer support systems, in front of people who witnessed the humiliation. I'm genuinely sorry for that, not just because of the consequences I faced but because I understand now how harmful it was. Olivia studied him carefully. That sounds sincere. Possibly even genuine rather than performed. It is genuine. I've had a year to think about what I did and why I did it. The racism wasn't just the specific comments, it was the entire worldview that made those comments seem acceptable. I'm working on changing that worldview, not just avoiding racist comments. Good. Keep doing that work. It's lifetime effort, not one-year correction. They talked for another 30 minutes about their respective work, about what Seo-jun was learning in his American assignment, about Olivia's McKinsey projects and her plans after completing her MBA. I'm not going back to Seoul National after this semester, Olivia said. I'm completing the MBA online while working full-time at McKinsey. The program was interesting but the social environment wasn't worth the hassle of dealing with students like you. I understand. I'm sorry I contributed to making that environment hostile. You did. But you're also doing work to change, which is more than most people do after being called out for racism. So I appreciate that effort even if I'm still angry about what happened. Fair. The anger is deserved. After Olivia left, Seo-jun thought about that conversation for days. She'd been willing to engage with him, to acknowledge his efforts to change, but she hadn't forgiven him or forgotten what he'd done. That seemed appropriate. Change didn't erase harm, it just prevented future harm. The remaining 6 months in America were transformative. Seo-jun continued working under Michelle's demanding supervision, continued developing operational skills and genuine business capabilities, continued experiencing what it meant to function in an environment where he wasn't automatically privileged. He also maintained the weekly mentorship sessions with Ambassador Martinez, now conducted via video call since he was in New York rather than Seoul. You've completed the required year in America, Ambassador Martinez said during their final session. Your father says you've done well in your assignment. Michelle Roberts reports that you've developed from entitled heir to competent analyst who actually understands operations. That's significant progress. Thank you for the mentorship. It's taught me more than I expected about how much I didn't understand about the world. Good. But understand something. This education doesn't end when the required sessions end. You've started examining unconscious bias and racist assumptions, but that's lifetime work, not one-year correction. You'll keep discovering areas where you hold problematic beliefs you haven't examined. The question is whether you'll keep doing the work to examine and change those beliefs when you're not being supervised. I will. Not just because it's morally right, but because I've learned that racist assumptions create strategic blindness that costs opportunities and relationships. Self-interest driving moral behavior. I'll take it. Ambassador Martinez smiled slightly. You're returning to Korea next month. Your father is restoring your position as heir, with the understanding that you've proven you can succeed on merit rather than just family connections. What are you going to do differently? I'm going to actually learn the business operations instead of just assuming leadership means delegating to competent people. I'm going to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than social dominance. I'm going to question my assumptions about people before acting on them. And I'm going to use the privilege I have to create opportunities for people who face the kind of bias I experienced this year. Those are good goals. Hold yourself accountable to them even when it's uncomfortable. Seo-jun returned to Korea 2 years after the hallway incident that had destroyed his social dominance and forced him to actually develop as a person. He was different. Not perfectly reformed, racism and unconscious bias weren't eliminated through 1 year of education and uncomfortable experiences. But genuinely changed in his understanding of power, merit, and respect. His father recognized the change immediately. You're ready for leadership now. Not because you've suffered appropriate consequences, but because you've actually learned something about what effective leadership requires. Seo-jun was restored to his position as heir to Dong Industries, with new responsibilities that reflected his developed capabilities. He implemented operational improvements based on what he'd learned in America, built more diverse hiring and promotion practices, created mentorship programs for employees from underrepresented backgrounds. 5 years after the hallway incident, Seo-jun encountered Olivia one final time at an international business conference in Singapore. She was presenting on inclusive business practices in global companies. He attended her session, impressed by her insights about how unconscious bias affected international business relationships and how companies could build more equitable practices. After her presentation, he approached her. That was excellent. The case studies about bias in hiring and promotion were particularly compelling. Thank you. I've been researching this area extensively. Turns out there's significant business value in actually addressing bias instead of just performing diversity commitments. I've been implementing some of those practices at Dong Industries. Diverse hiring, promotion based on performance evaluation rather than unconscious favoritism, mentorship programs. Your research has been helpful. Olivia looked surprised. You've been following my research? I have. You're doing important work about problems I contributed to. Seemed appropriate to learn from you. That's actually very mature. More mature than I expected from the arrogant heir who tried to humiliate me for not showing sufficient deference. I'm not that person anymore. Though I remember being him, which keeps me humble about how much work maintaining changed behavior requires. They talked for an hour about their respective work, about the changes Seo-jun had implemented at Dong Industries, about Olivia's research findings and consulting work. You actually did the work to change, Olivia said finally. I wasn't sure you would. Most people perform remorse until consequences fade, then revert to old behavior. You've sustained changed behavior for 5 years. That's significant. I had good teachers. Your father's mentorship was invaluable. Michelle Roberts taught me operational competence I never would have developed otherwise. And you taught me by example what it means to succeed despite facing bias I'd never had to confront. I didn't teach you anything deliberately. I just existed while being competent and black. which taught me that my assumptions about merit and qualifications were based on racist programming I needed to examine. So thank you for that education, even though you didn't choose to provide it. Olivia smiled. You're welcome, I suppose. Though I'd have preferred not having to be the teaching moment for your racism education. Understandable. I'm sorry that burden fell on you. They parted as something approximating friends, not close, but respectful of each other's capabilities and growth. 10 years after the hallway incident, Seo-jun led Dong Industries as CEO after his father retired. He built the company into a leader in inclusive business practices, known for diverse hiring and equitable promotion policies that actually worked rather than just performing diversity. He married, had children, raised them with honest education about racism and privilege that he'd never received from his own parents. And he never forgot the lesson he'd learned from trying to humiliate a classmate who turned out to be the daughter of one of the most powerful diplomatic figures in the world. Assumptions based on race, nationality, or any other surface characteristic are strategically stupid and morally wrong. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. And the people you underestimate might be exactly the people who teach you the most important lessons about who you actually are versus who you need to become. Assumptions reveal more about the person making them than about the person being judged. Seo-jun Dong assumed Olivia Martinez was unqualified, unimportant, inferior. Those assumptions revealed his racism, his limited worldview, his inability to imagine that Black Americans could achieve success through merit rather than affirmative action. The assumptions were catastrophically wrong. But more importantly, they were based on unconscious beliefs Seo-jun had never examined because they'd never cost him anything. That's how unconscious bias works. We absorb attitudes and stereotypes from our environments, internalize them as truth, and act on them without recognizing they're based on prejudice rather than reality. Examining those biases requires work. Uncomfortable, continuous work that never ends because we keep discovering new areas where our assumptions are based on prejudice rather than information. But that work is essential if we want to function effectively in diverse environments, build genuine relationships across differences, and avoid making strategic errors based on limited perspectives. Seo-jun's story shows both the cost of unexamined bias and the possibility of change. He made racist assumptions that nearly destroyed his family's business relationships and his own future. But he did the work to actually change rather than just performing remorse until consequences faded. That change required education, uncomfortable experiences being a minority, developing empathy through experiencing bias himself, and sustained effort to examine and change unconscious beliefs. It's not a redemption arc that erases the harm he caused. Olivia still experienced his racism. That experience still affected her. Change doesn't erase harm, it just prevents future harm. But change is possible. People who've held racist beliefs can examine those beliefs, understand why they're wrong, and actually develop different ways of seeing and interacting with people from different backgrounds. The question is whether we're willing to do that work when it's uncomfortable, when it costs us status or privilege, when it requires admitting we've been wrong about fundamental things. Seo-jun did that work. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And he became a better leader, better person, better father because of it. That's the lesson: assumptions based on prejudice are strategically stupid and morally wrong. Examining and changing those assumptions is hard work that never ends. But it's work worth doing if we want to build a world where people succeed based on actual merit rather than on surface characteristics. If you loved this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about confronting bias, unexpected power dynamics, and the transformations that happen when we examine beliefs we've never questioned. Comment below, have you ever made assumptions about someone that turned out to be completely wrong? Or been underestimated based on how you look? Share your stories. Thanks for watching, and remember, the people you underestimate might be exactly the people who teach you the most important lessons. Make fewer assumptions. Ask more questions. Examine your biases before they cost you everything. Until next time. Book sparkles.